I interviewed Sir Desmond
Okay.
on Saturday, and he was talking about what he believed was probably one of the first, if not the first, sort of international tribunal since Nuremberg dealing with the dispute in Gambia. And that's your native country. Tell me a little bit about the dispute and maybe your involvement with Sir Desmond.
Yes. Well, my relationship with Sir Desmond goes back to 1981. In that year, there was an attempt by some armed civilians to overthrow the constitutional government, which was headed by the then President Sir Dawda Jawara. The Gambia was, at that time, one of the few multi-party democracies in Africa. We had elections every 5 years, freely and fairly conducted and acknowledged, even by the opposition and the outside world, to be free and fair. You had an independent judiciary. You had a constitution which guaranteed human rights, fundamental freedoms, and provided for access to the High Court to challenge governmental actions and so on. But in 1981, we had this revolt by a kind of Marxist-Leninist group, which took up arms and tried to overthrow the government. It was unsuccessful. It was put down by loyalist forces, supported by Senegalese soldiers. Many people were, of course, arrested for their involvement in this bloody event. And then the question was, how would they be tried? The Gambia is a small country. It was even much smaller then, some 30 years ago. I don't think we were up to 1 million people, or just about 1 million people. And the government, headed by Sir Dawda Jawara, had concerns about the ability and the impartiality, or the challenges that a judiciary of locals would face in trying to prosecute and adjudicate on these cases of treason. These were serious charges of treason against some of the senior rebels. So it was decided that in order to ensure that there were free and fair trials, that Gambians should not be involved. Gambian judges should not be involved in these cases, nor should Gambian prosecutors be involved in the cases, but that foreign judges and foreign prosecutors would be hired to come in and do the job. So as a result, a special division of the then Supreme Court was established, providing for the appointment of foreign judges. And the judges were appointed by the president, largely from Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Nigeria. There was a special office in the Attorney General's chambers, special office of prosecutors, which was created again with foreign prosecutors. Desmond de Silva then, Sir Desmond now, was appointed as the chief prosecutor in 1981 to supervise the prosecution of these cases. And I had the privilege of working with him then. I was then the principal state attorney in the Ministry of Justice, in the Attorney General's office. And it was my duty then to prepare the files, especially of the top 20 or so, and forward them to him for him to prosecute. He still is a great prosecutor, extremely competent, of course, with a great knowledge of the law and also of practice. Very articulate, very humorous too, but very dedicated to pursuing justice. And it was a pleasure working with him over those years. And I saw him take decisions at that time which were not palatable to some, but which were professionally correct. There was one particular case, for instance, the leader of the then opposition party was suspected of having been involved in the attempted coup, in the rebellion. And he was arrested and charged with treason. But before he was charged, he was arrested and put in detention like the others. And so a file was put together, which went through me, and I sent it to Sir Desmond to review and advise and take a decision, because it was for the foreign prosecutors to decide who to prosecute and not to prosecute. Sir Desmond looked at the file and felt the evidence wasn't good, it wasn't sufficient, and that there was a risk if he was prosecuted, there was a risk that the government would be accused of having gone out in a vendetta to try to get rid of the leader of the opposition. He advised the Attorney General accordingly against the prosecution. Unfortunately, there were others, also foreign lawyers, in the same office who felt otherwise, who thought a case could be made out. And they advised, the Attorney General to go for a prosecution, which unfortunately he did. And the case collapsed on trial because the witnesses were found to be, not creditworthy at all. And it vindicated Sir Dennis's own legal opinion and his professionalism in dealing with those cases. I remember distinctly that case file which he had to deal with. Subsequently, I was asked then, when the leader of the opposition was acquitted, there was a new Attorney General who then passed the file to me and asked me, should we appeal or not appeal? And I felt just like Sir Dennis, and I wrote accordingly also an opinion to the effect that we should not proceed on appeal. And in any case, we could not. The chances were very nil. The judge had acquitted. The chances were negligible because the judge had acquitted the accused largely on the issue of credibility of the witnesses. And to have proceeded on appeal would have been quite an uphill task. So we closed that file. And eventually the leader of the opposition was released from detention. So,
what was Fatu's role in all of this?
Fatu was then, I think, a clerk in the court, not in the ministry, I think, not in the Attorney General. I think she was on the other side, in the judiciary, in the High Court. And because my relationship with her also goes back to those days, from before she went to read law and throughout her legal career as well. So she was providing support to the judges at that particular time as well. And so, of course, interacted with Sir Dennis as well and the prosecutors.
What was the result of the trial? Do you remember were the convictions?
There were convictions. Quite a number were convicted of treason and sent to sentenced to terms of imprisonment, some for life, some for shorter terms. Quite a few were acquitted. Can't give the precise numbers now. But he did a good job in presenting the evidence objectively, dispassionately, and correctly. And some were acquitted, some were convicted. And to the credit of the team and to the credit of the government and the judicial system, even Amnesty International, which had been observing these proceedings, these trials, all along, kind of certified that the trials had been free and had been conducted properly with all due respect for the rights of the accused persons.
How come we haven't heard more about this?
It's a bit. I have written about it a bit, but I haven't published it yet, and I'm hoping by the end of the year to publish it. But what's important is that this was actually, and probably the first experiment in modern times to set up a hybrid court, because this was truly a hybrid court. It was hybrid. It was a court which was grafted into our own national court structure, but it comprised non-Gambians. The judges and the prosecutors were all Gambians, supported, of course, by other officials in terms of police investigators, etc. And the concern was the same, to ensure that the local population was insulated from charges of partiality and so on. It was best that the cases would be managed by foreigners in our own country. Years later, many years later, decades later, of course, the same thing was tried in Sierra Leone. So it is. I think it is probably the first precedent for international hybrid courts.